Hi, I'm CP, welcome to Bespoke, and in this video I'm reviewing the Plasencia 146 Cosecha. This review has been conducted using the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, a quantifiable review matrix that you can use at home. Simply look in the description where you'll find a link which will take you to a guide which teaches you how to use it. Moreover, these cigars have been spending the last 3 weeks in the Boveda acrylic humidor that you can just about see behind me. I used 69% Boveda packs and monitored them with a Boveda butler. This is a step that we include in all our reviews to ensure that they've been properly acclimated and standardized for every single one. Launched in 2017, the 146 Cosecha was released to celebrate the 146th anniversary or harvest of the Plasencia family, which first started in Cuba in 1865. It's a Honduran and Nicaraguan blend, and it's actually manufactured at the Tabacos de Oriente SA in Honduras. The whole blend, the whole cigar, consists entirely of Criollo 98 that was harvested in 2012. The wrapper is Honduran Criollo, the binder is Nicaraguan, and the filler consists of both Honduran and Nicaraguan Criollo 98. The cigar I have in my hand is the La Musica 5x50. It's a Robusto. However, there are a range of different formats and vitolas available for this cigar as well, including torpedoes and some other figurados. Jumping into the look and feel, as you can see, it is a wonderfully straight cigar. Indeed, there are very few soft spots. It's quite firm to the touch. It gives off a nice firm spring, bordering on hard. The hue has a ground cinnamon color, and in terms of oils, it does release a nice sheen. The veins are quite refined, although you can clearly see the leaf protruding in the roll, but really that's no big deal. In terms of aromas on the foot, I experienced and noted down here on the Bespoke Unit Cigar Formula, caramel, nutmeg and labdanum musk. As you can see, I've already cut the cigar, so we'll jump straight into the Prelight. In terms of draw, it is ideal. It gives you just the right amount of airflow and resistance. The flavors are quite modest. They're quite subtle, but there is certainly something there. Indeed, we have salted caramel as opposed to caramel on the last time. Indeed, there's a slight saltiness, salty residue that is left on the lips. Some cocoa, specifically sweetened cocoa powder and not cacao. And some gourmand tonka bean that just adds a level of depth to the Prelight. Well, I guess I'm going to have to light this up, and for that I'm going to have to remove this tertiary band. Indeed, it has 3 bands, and so, it just slips right off. I have heard of them, and I have had some which are a little bit too zealously glued on, and sometimes you can take a little bit of the wrapper off with them, but this one just slipped off perfectly. Into the first third here, as you can see. Nice strong ash, but we'll talk more about that later. The burn is a little bit uneven, but it's corrected itself compared to how it was about halfway down the burn line, halfway down the first third. The flavors have taken a while to properly develop. It was quite refreshing up until halfway through the first third, and it's only been the last, I'd say, half a centimeter that's really developed a noticeable tableau of flavor. One of the most overt notes is going to be salted caramel. Indeed, this cigar does have an overall sweet profile. There's some charred thyme in there. So, for example, you take some dried thyme herbs and you burn them. It's going to give you a very similar aroma to this. And there's a hint of spice, but it's very fine. It's particularly noticeable on the retrohale, and I would liken that to cinnamon. Overall, a very pleasant, more light-bodied experience than I expected. Nevertheless, I do believe it's going to build in character as I progress. And I will see you probably as we get to just above the band, or I'll probably shuffle the band back so I don't have to remove it straight away as we're halfway through the second third. So now I'm about halfway through the first third, and in terms of body, it has developed slightly, but not as much as I expected. And the same can be said about the flavor profile. That being said, there have been some interesting changes in terms of notes. Firstly, the salted caramel has transitioned to something that has a greater resemblance with molasses, has a much thicker texture, while the charred thyme I would more compare with charred bay leaf instead. It still has an aromatic presence, but it's a little bit deeper and not quite as playful. Meanwhile, the cinnamon is all but gone, and there isn't that much spiciness in this cigar anymore. Instead, it's taken on a more of a woody characteristic, which I would liken at this stage to potentially rosewood. Otherwise, the burn has stabilized quite nicely. It's corrected itself, while the ash came off just after I entered the second third, maybe a little bit later. I've shifted back the bands a little bit, so that's why it doesn't. I haven't had to remove it. I didn't want to take it off straight away. I do like having some ornamentation, especially when I'm reviewing a cigar. So I'm about halfway through the final third here, and I think I've pretty much got everything I'm going to get out of this cigar. The final third is quite a change of pace compared to the first two. Indeed, I think the rosewood in the second third was a bit of a premonition or precursor into what was going to happen in the final third. The final third is significantly woodier than the first two. Indeed, it has primarily a dominating oaky note, which is accompanied by some leather and a hint of nutmeg. The nutmeg can be mostly perceptible through the retrohale. It's not overly peppery, although I would perhaps liken it to a subtle hint of pepper in there as well. When it comes to the overall complexity of this cigar, it's not the most complex experience that you could have, especially from Plasencia, who does have some incredibly refined cigars. It's going to be more refreshing. It's a little bit more casual in that aspect, but it does have some discernible notes. The mouthfeel isn't overly smooth either. I wouldn't call it coarse by any means, but it's going to be a little bit more lighter on the palate. As for its astringence, it's very balanced. It doesn't cause too much salivation nor any dryness. Indeed, you can easily smoke this without an accompaniment or a beverage. And the palate stimulation tends to focus in a little bit towards the middle, towards the end of the cigar, and from the outside of the palate during the first and second third. So it creeps up and makes its way up the tongue. The life cycle isn't overly developed, although it's quite consistent. There is an evolution in the cigar, but you don't feel any distinctive changes in pace. Although that being said, the final third is stronger in body than the first two. Indeed, it does have a more medium characteristic. And the finish of the cigar is quite lingering. It does last on the palate for a while. You'll notably still continue to get some of those leather aromas. And the residual scent in the room is indeed very pleasant. The aroma isn't going to be offensive whatsoever. It's got a nice woody fragrance to it, and it doesn't leave too much stale tobacco. When it comes to the overall burn, as you can see, the burn line has pretty much corrected itself completely, and I haven't touched the cigar whatsoever. The ash has a nice backbone, a dark steely grey colour. As you can see from the first third, here is the ash that I had earlier, and it's staying together quite nicely. It's not too flaky. But it does have a tendency to plop up, which is what happened to me. Fortunately, I had this to catch it, and the temperature of the smoke is very cool. When it comes to the overall experience of the 146 Cosecha, I'm quite fond of the overuse, the zealous use of bands here. I quite like the one on the foot, which gives you Cosecha privada. That protects the foot and prevents any knocks or bumps. The only issue I've heard, and I have experienced in some cigars, is that they can be a little bit too glued on there and difficult to remove because they're matte paper. But otherwise, the primary band, it has a nice, attractive silver and grey aspect about it, but it's quite modern. It doesn't try and be one of these old worldy types of bands. And then the final band, what's quite handy about this is that because the main band is so large, it leaves you a little bit of ornamentation that you can continue to have as you finish your cigar all the way down to the nub. On the Robusto, this band, the primary band, is pretty large. However, I've noticed that it uses the same size band for the larger vitolas like the La Vega, so that's not going to be as much of a problem. You won't have to remove it so soon. When it comes to the box is quite classic, sturdy in build. It's a wooden box that continues to use the same color scheme, so the use of greys, silver, and dark colors. It's quite modern if you compare it to, for example, the Reserva Original, which it has this kind of rustic look about it. The Plasencia 146 Cosecha goes for a much more conventional, modern look for the American market. As for the value of this cigar, expect an RRP of around $12 per stick if you buy them individually. However, if you buy a box of these Robustos, the La Musica Robustos, expect them to come across, it's a 10 count box, it's $100, so that comes to $10 per cigar. Oh, and I realized I forgot to mention the occasion for smoking the cigar, and indeed that's something definitely worth mentioning, given that it is quite, I wouldn't say a mild cigar, but it's kind of a, let's say a mild plus and just short of being a medium so far. This is a cigar that's very versatile in the different ways that it can be enjoyed. For example, it's a cigar that can be taken to a variety of different occasions, such as weddings. The modern design with the silver colouring would be quite appropriate for that kind of scenario. It can also be taken to social clubs and other locations, but it's a cigar that can be quite easily enjoyed with friends, you know, in the backyard, at a barbecue, or even alone for a bit of contemplation. I would suggest this is a cigar for the mid-afternoon, probably something that you could certainly consider as a digestif after enjoying a large lunch. And finally, I'm going to talk about the pairings that I would suggest with this cigar, and this isn't something that we score in the review, it's just a consideration that we like to add and something we like to discuss to give you an idea of how you could possibly enjoy it. First of all, for food, obviously you don't have to have it while you're having food. This could be the digestif following the food, but pretzels is a nice accompaniment. It has the certain saltiness and the yeastiness that you can expect to pair well with the characteristics of this cigar. Otherwise, I would consider steak haché or ground beef, and that can come in a variety of forms. For example, it could be a classic burger, or you could go for a French tartare. Alternatively, why not consider it in a bolognese with the pasta? That could be particularly pleasant too. And finally, something that sort of sprung up and I thought would be quite interesting would be magret de canard, so a duck fillet with the fat on it. You could have this with orange or potentially with honey and balsamic vinegar, which is very, very nice when you cook that. You create the sauce and then you cook that in a Le Creuset. As for beverages, I would choose to pair this personally with a La Flor de Caña. Perhaps the Flor de Caña 18 would go quite nice. It's a floral and light dark rum, so it wouldn't overpower the cigar whatsoever, and the refreshing first third would go quite well with it as well. Alternatively, you could consider an Armagnac rather than a Cognac. Cognacs tend to have more the fruitiness and the personality stripped away, so it could be great, have a greater influence from the wood during barrel aging, whereas an Armagnac tends to have a much livelier personality. It's going to be a bit richer in character, a bit more fruit forward, which would go well with the cigar, and they would pair nicely in terms of body. And finally, rather than coffee, I'd actually suggest a root beer. Root beer is a pairing that I really enjoy, and it's quite difficult for me living in France to be able to get some. But if you go for a nice craft root beer with its vanilla essence and the sarsaparilla, it would pair wonderfully with the cigar. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, feel free to give us a like and don't forget to subscribe, switch on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment if you have any questions or comments about your experiences with this cigar. Otherwise, head to bespokeunit.com to see more of the men's lifestyle subjects that we cover, and check out some of the other videos that we've covered here on Bespoke Unit. Until next time, take care.